What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we are back with the final from the Adepticon Schaumburg, Chicago, Illinois, call it what you will, Vault Tour. And what is amazing about the finals is it is the adaptive format. That means that they both play with their decks. Their next game they play with their opponent's deck. You swap decks at the end of the game. And then if there's a game free, you bid chains on the one you actually want. On the left, we've got George with Gasoline Maximillo Dungeon Keeper, a Dis Logos Untamed deck. And on the right, we have MX Hongernail Delgado, played by Daniel, a Brobnar Shadows Untamed deck. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that means we have a non-Shadows deck in the final. The thing is, it's got Untamed, which can go nuts with Ember, and it's a library access deck. And we have seen some dumb combos with library access. Lets you draw a card every time you play a card. So this is going to be super interesting. Firstly, are we going to see the same player win 2 games? Or are we going to see the same deck win 2 games? And then, if the same deck wins 2 games, then what's going to happen in terms of bidding on it? That's interesting. So we start off then, straight away, it looks like George is going first, and he just drops down a Quixo the Adventurer. It's got Skirmish, and when you fight, you draw a card. Not the most powerful turn 1 play we've ever seen. Now we do see a common Cold coming down from Daniel here, which would destroy every Mars creature, but there are no Mars creatures, just gets him an Ember. And we see Mighty Tiger. When you play it, you deal 4 damage to an enemy creature. That's enough to take George's creature out. And then we see a Witch of the Eye. Great, because when you reap, you get a card back. Of course, it doesn't always last that long for fairly obvious reasons. So we see a Ritual of Balance and a Nepenthe Seed coming down from George here. Gets a big twig down. Building up his board, but not really doing very much. No Ember. We've had 1 Ember so far. Both players have had a full turn, and we see a total of 1 Ember on the field. Oh, this will treble it, though. We've got Dust Pixie coming down to get 2 Ember. It's not a powerful creature, but it gives you 2 Ember when you play it. That seems pretty good for me. And then we see a Nature's Call coming down. Return up to 3 creatures to their opponent's hand. Oh, look, he's putting back the Dust Pixie and then playing it down to get another 2 Ember. Then we're reaping with Mighty Tiger. We're reaping with Witch of the Eye, which gets Nature's Call back. Do you think he's going to play it and pick up a Dust Pixie and play it back down again? He's actually not. Now, there is an argument to save it here because, of course, Mighty Tiger does have a really good coming into play ability as well that deals 4 damage to an enemy creature. But then again, he could play it and pick up the Mighty Tiger and not play it back down again. But he has, as I suspected, just chosen to go the Dust Pixie route. Play it, pick up Dust Pixie, and roll. So he's checking with 10 Ember here. And here's the thing, there's no shadows on George's side of the field. He's going to struggle to get rid of that. Now, he is able to steal a single Ember there, which is quite nice, but he doesn't do all that much. Now, he has got Shaffles down. At the end of the turn, your opponent loses 1 Ember, which is quite nice. Also, he's actually got 2 Shaffles in his deck. Would have been really nice to pick up that Mighty Tiger and save it, because that could just get rid of Shaffles right away. Although, having said that, George does play a Control the Weak, so he does get to determine which house Dan has actually got to use here. Although, oh yes, he's just saying, hey, come on man, Shaffles, you've got to lose an Ember. Which he does, but not enough to stop him forging a key, which is lovely. So, yeah, that's Shaffles. And Shaffles is at the end of your turn. So it's not the end of your opponent's, but it is still every turn. Yeah, and then straight away, he's getting rid of a couple creatures there. He kind of has to. It has to be done. So he's just dealing 2 damage to everything there. And that's good. Just deal some damage and just get rid of Shaffle. Shaffle's going to be a problem. So he plays down Urchin, steals an Ember, and this is good. This is really quick. He needs a couple more Ember, mind you. But this is a really good start from Dan. He's getting that Ember, and he's kind of rushing. He knows that George isn't playing Shadows. And although he's playing Logos, he will have seen that there's no effervescent principle. Both players lose half their Ember rounding down. So there really are none of these emergency stopping you forge cards that George has here. Now, he is just doing a bit of fighting there, taking down Witch of the Eye, which is very, very important. And he gets a Dominator Bauble down as well. That's kind of nice. Also does get a Guardian Demon down. You get to heal 2 damage from a creature and deal that damage to another creature. So I believe that's actually what got rid of the Witch of the Eye there. But the main thing is he did get rid of Witch of the Eye. That Witch of the Eye is an extremely powerful card. Does the same thing as Nepenthe, which of course George does actually have on the field as it stands at the moment. So, I mean, really, when we're looking at Dan's position here, Ember rushing would be a good idea. Just rushing, seeing how much Ember he can actually go for. Now, he does get Brobnar down, and I believe he's actually punching there. Get rid of one of only 2 creatures George has actually got on the field. Punch gives you an Ember bonus and deals 3 damage to a creature. It's a very Brobnar card. Just do damage. He also gets a Fire Spitter down. Before you fight, you deal 1 damage to each enemy creature. And it does have an armor, which you don't see in many Brobnar creatures. Now down comes Ganger Chieftain. You may ready and fight with a neighbouring creature, which he does, and Guardian Demon goes right back down again. So he's completely cleared the board. Now, there are still a bunch of artifacts out there, but there's no creatures out. Now, that looks like Grenade Snib? I want to say that's Grenade Snib that just came down. When it's destroyed, your opponent loses 2 Ember, which is quite nice. It means either your opponent leaves it there reaping and you gain a bunch of Ember, or they get rid of it and you make them lose a couple of Ember. Either way, it actually works quite nicely indeed. It's good times. Good times, ladies and gentlemen. So, still not all that much going on for George here. He's got no creatures out. He's got 3 Ember. There's not going to be any reaping here because, of course, creatures come into play exhausted and it takes a turn before you're actually allowed to reap with them. So there's not going to be any reaping here. Now, maybe he's able to play down some cards and get some Ember bonuses, but it's not very much he's got at the moment. Now, he does have a Wild Wormhole, gives him an Ember and lets him play the top card of his deck, which is a Lab Work, which gives him an Ember, sorry, a Sloppy Lab Work. No, it is a regular Lab Work. I was right the first time. Now he gets a Dimension Door down, and he gets a Phase Shift down. Dimension Door for the remainder of the turn. Any Ember you would gain from reaping is stolen from your opponent instead. There ain't going to be no reaping. But he does get a Phase Shift, which allows him to play a Dis creature, which is nice. That's a bonus. That's a really nice bonus. And it looks like it's a Dust Imp there. When it's destroyed, you gain 2 Ember. So basically the exact opposite of a Grenade Snip. They've even both got 2 power and no skirmish or elusive or any of that. So that's kind of nice. Got them on both sides of the board here. I believe that's a Dust Imp. Can be quite difficult with the glare and the size of the pictures, but I feel pretty good about it. Side note, love George's hat. That's a great hat. I also am a Spider-Man fan. We've also got some good beards rocking out, although I think George is probably winning the beard round here. Certainly if you're looking for more of a show beard. So, over to Dan here, and it looks like he's reaping with Mighty Tiger. And he seems to really be wanting to rush Ember here. He can see that George hasn't forged a key. He can see that George won't be forging a key on his next turn. And he plays down Dust Pixie. Now, for anyone wondering, there are 2 in his deck. 1 in George's, 2 in Dan's. And, oh, I mean, the Nature's Call Dust Pixie combo is great. He makes George pick up his only creature. And it's also a nice way to get Dust Imp off the field without having to lose anything. Oh, and he actually chooses to pick up an Urchin as well. Of course, Nature's Call returns up to 3 creatures to their owner's hand, so he should be able to play a Dust Pixie here and get 2 more Ember. And although he can't play the Urchin right away to steal an Ember, he's got it in hand for his next Shadow's turn. So there comes a Dust Pixie, and just like last time, he's up to 10 Ember here. And this is one of the huge, and we talked about this in a bunch of these rounds, this is one of the huge downsides of playing a deck like George is playing. You don't have any of these emergency you shall not forge cards. Now, I believe that's an Ancient Bear that just hit the field. Won't do anything now, but it's got Assault 2. Before you attack, you deal 2 damage. That's pretty nice. That's pretty good. So Dan is setting himself up really nicely here. Really nicely. He's forged a key. George still hasn't forged. He's got a lot of Ember. Now, we do see 1 Ember being stolen here. That is Ritual of Balance coming into play. Oh, and he's actually playing down 5 untamed creatures. Let's see if we can see them. It's Big Twig, Ancient Bear, Murmook, Mushroom Man, and, oh, that one on the end. I want to say Taliga? Yes, Taliga, it's a rare. We don't see it very often. And Taliga's great. Every time your opponent plays a creature, you gain an Ember. It's the opposite of Hunting Witch. It's really, really good. Now, we did see a Murmook coming down there, which, of course, increases the cost of forging a key by 1, which means Dan does get to forge a key here, which is lovely, but it means he had to pay 7 Ember for the privilege rather than 6. But he's still up 2 keys to nothing. He is in an awkward position here now, because every time he plays a creature, he's giving George an Ember. And he's also staring down the fact that George has got enough to forge as it stands. So even if he played something like an Urchin, he'd steal an Ember, but then George would gain an Ember, so they'd be... Dan would still gain an Ember. Dan would still be 1 Ember up, but it wouldn't really do very much. Not in terms of stop... I mean, it would do fine in terms of him getting Ember, but it wouldn't do much in terms of George forging, or stopping him forge. Having said that, does he even care? He's got a nice board set up with 6 different creatures. I want to say they're all Untamed and Brobnar as well. I think he's got 3 Untamed, 3 Brobnar, which means he could just go Untamed and Reap 3 times, or go Brobnar and Reap 3 times. And he's up by 2 keys to 0. So he could just go rushing here. So Gang of Chieftain does just take out that Taliga, and you had to. That Taliga is just too good. Now he's free to play as many creatures as he like. Having said that, there's nothing to stop George using that Nepenthe next turn to get that Taliga right back. And because it's a passive ability, as soon as he puts it down, it's there. So Ancient Bear goes down because of Fire Spitter, which is taken down in its stead. And that does 1 damage to each of George's creatures at the same time. Now, Grenade Snib goes down. I love this play. I adore this play from Dan here. Grenade Snib takes down Murmook, which because of Fire Spitter was down to 2 health. At which point, Murmook goes down, Grenade Snib goes down, and George loses 2 Ember, meaning he's not actually in a position to do very much. He can't forge next turn. Oh, and there's even some capturing going on here as well. That's very sad. Now, he is Brobnar here, and I believe he's going Unguarded Camp. No. Is that Unguarded Camp? Yes. For each creature you have in excess of your opponent, a friendly creature captures 1 Ember. So 4 creatures to 2 means 2 creatures can capture an Ember. Oh, and Gang of Chieftain comes down, which should ready and fight with a neighbouring creature. Or maybe he doesn't want to. It says you may, you don't have to. It's a choice you've got. So he might just be kind of leaving it here. Yeah, choosing not to do so. He's just putting his cards back, and then we're back and rolling. So, I mean, he's not got enough to forge, but Dan is in a wonderful, wonderful position here. I also really appreciate that Dan has got his Lanyard showing his name the whole time. Oh, so Big Twig there. Now, when Big Twig reaps, it's got a really nice skill that stuns and exhausts a creature. So by reaping there, he's able to stun and exhaust that Gang of Chieftain, which was really, really nice. That was a great little play. And it looks like he's playing 3 Fates here, which destroys the 3 most powerful creatures. Now, that's Mushroom Man. Now, remember, Mushroom Man at the time was a 11 power, because it's 2 plus 3 for each unforged key you have. So, it took down Gang of Chieftain, but it did take down Big Twig. And it did take down I've already forgotten what the other creature was. Mushroom Man. Did take down Mushroom Man as well. Now, we do see Dominator Bauble coming into play here. Now, Dominator Bauble's a really fun one. It's an artifact that just lets you use a friendly creature. Doesn't do too much, unfortunately. It doesn't ready them. It just lets you use them. So, if he had a non... Oh, yes, I believe... Yeah, so he could have used that to use one of his non-disc creatures. So, down we come. I believe that's a Headhunter hit in the field here. When you fight, you gain an Ember, which is quite nice. Now, is there any way he can rush this? We've only got one Brobnar creature down at the moment. He plays a Relentless Assault here, lets you ready and fight with up to 3 different friendly creatures, one at a time. Now, it says ready and fight, so you fight there, take him out, no more board, lovely. But because you are ready and there's nothing to fight, you can then reap. You do as much as you can on the card. You ready the creature, if there's something to fight, you fight, but if there's nothing to fight, then you can go ahead and reap. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like he's been able to hold George off for any longer. Looks like George is going to be able to forge a key this turn. And Dan is not yet able to forge a key. He's still only got 4 Ember. So it's not there yet. It's not in the bag. I think Dan's in a great position. He's having a really good game. But it's not in the bag as it stands at the moment. He just needs to get some more Ember down. He doesn't need to worry about stopping Dan forging yet. Dan's only got 4 Ember. But he really does need to rush and get himself some Ember. He needs to catch up and get a second key. That's really important at this stage. The problem is he's not been able to keep any creatures on the field. As much as I'm not a huge Brobnar fan, one of the great things that Brobnar does is stop you having creatures. They're great at fighting, they're great at clearing the board. And that's one thing we've seen from Dan's deck throughout this game. He's using Brobnar to clear the board, and if you haven't got any creatures, you can't reap. Now, we do see a Dust Pixie coming down. That gets you a couple of Ember. And I want to say that's Flaxia? No, I'm lying to you, ladies and gentlemen. I am lying to you. There's no Flaxia in this deck. Oh, it's Big Twig. He's back. It's Big Twig. Hey, Big Twig. I'm pretty sure that's Big Twig. Or is it... It's definitely not Big Twig, it's Hunting Witch. Each time you play another creature, you gain an Ember. I did wonder how that was back. So Bad Penny is down for Dan now. And we also see Silvertooth. Remember, Silvertooth comes into play ready. And this is the Silvertooth play, right? You play Silvertooth, you reap, jobs are good 'un. Now, Urchin comes down and steals an Ember, and this is exactly what George wanted here. He's just rushed... Oh, we see another Ember being stolen here. This is bad, ladies and gentlemen. This is not ideal. And that was Magdala Rat, which actually stole 2 Ember, although when it leaves play, your opponent steals 2 Ember. But this is beautiful for George. He's up by 2 keys. Sorry, for Dan. It's hard, I don't have the names on the screen, and Dan's turned his lanyard around. So, George isn't able to forge here, and Dan is sitting there rocking 9 Embers. Not the 10 he usually has, but he's sitting there rocking 9 Ember. Right, here it is. This is the turn. Library access comes down, and this is either going to be a redonk turn where George just crushes and wins, or he's going to lose the game. It is as simple as that. His opponent has got 9 Ember and 2 keys, but this is it. He's got library access. I love the little card he's made there. That's kind of cool. So, library access goes down, plays Nepenthe, or uses Nepenthe for a second library access. So now every time he plays a card, he draws 2 cards. Alright? So, plays down Skippy Timehog. Skippy Timehog stops your opponent playing cards, using cards next turn. They can still play, draws himself 2 cards. Now he drops down a Dexter, which captures an Ember, and he draws himself 2 cards. I mean, the Nepenthe library access is such a redonk combo. Now we see a Library of Babel come down. And that's going to get him, wait for it, 2 cards. And now we see Fogify. Your opponent cannot use creatures to fight on their next turn. and that's going to get him 2 cards. And this is what is so ridiculous here. It's not just that he's drawing so many cards, it's that he's actually stopping his opponent. He's already dropped a Skippy Time Hog to stop people using cards. Now, the Fogify actually doubles up, cannot use creatures to fight. Well, Skippy Time Hog's already kind of done more than that. But remember, he's still got to stop his opponent forging. So there is a dimension door. Every Ember you would gain from reaping. Oh, and there's a 3rd library access is stolen from your opponent instead. So, look, he's going to have every card he wants this turn. And don't forget, he's got a phase shift in his deck. So there's a Quixo the Adventurer. That's quite nice. And he's also got a Wild Wormhole in his deck. So this is the combo. And you look, he's going to basically run through his deck at this stage. That's just the way it is. Every time he plays a card, he's drawing 3 cards. Unless he completely bricks, he's just going to be drawing card after card after card. I mean, that Wild Wormhole alone is going to draw him 6 cards. 3 for playing the Wild Wormhole, then he'll play the top card of his deck, then he'll draw 3 more. And you can see Daniel there just being like, why? And Daniel knows that George is going to have whatever he wants this turn. Dan is essentially going to have his whole deck to play with. So there goes Wild Wormhole, gets himself an Ember, draws 3 cards, plays the top card of his deck, which I think is actually a logo. Is that discard? It's very hard to tell. Draws another 3 cards, and he's going to have his phase shift at some point, which means that he's going to be able to play. Oh, he's actually got it right at the top there. So there's another Wild Wormhole. No, he'd already played Wild Wormhole. Yes. Okay. I think he's good. I think we're good. Now I'm just looking to see whether he actually plays any key cheating cards like Chota Hazri or Key Charge. I don't believe he actually does. So I don't think he's going to be able to forge mid-turn here. No, he's still not stopped Dan forging, and he's still not got enough to forge himself. He's got basically his entire deck to play with. Okay, so down comes a Twin Bolt Emission, which does 2 damage to each of 2 different creatures, and draws 3 cards. Oh my goodness. And here's the thing, right? He's just going to be able to do everything. Literally everything. There goes a phase shift. And now he's going to be able to draw 3 cards. Yeah, he's got cards here. Just Skippy Time Hog's in play, and Fogify's in play, and just saying, look, all this stuff is in play. So the question is what he actually wants. Because he needs to get Ember away from George here. That's the key. It's getting Ember away from... Sorry, Dan. Man, I'm getting these wrong a lot. He needs to get Ember away from Dan. So there goes a Wild Wormhole. And the other thing is, because he can just keep going here, he can essentially just have his whole deck. And he can play some with Wild Wormhole. He can play some with Phase Shift and all of that. So... Okay, I believe he's actually drawn his entire deck now. Although Wild Wormhole's then going to be there. So what does he need? If he had a Shadow Suite here, he could be using stuff like Phase Shift to play bait and switch and Too Much to Protect and all of that. But he still needs to get... Okay, there's a library access. This gets very complicated very quickly. But it all boils down to I can have whatever I want. So there's a Twin Bolt Emission. And it looks like... Oh, and of course he then draws those 3 cards. So he should be able to clear Dan's side of the field here. So there comes a Phase Shift. Now remember, Phase Shift does not have to be used immediately. Phase Shift essentially sits out there, and you can at any point between playing the Phase Shift and the end of your turn, go ahead and use something. Which is very nice. And there's another Twin Bolt Emission. Remember, because he's basically drawing every time he does anything, he's going to keep getting the cards back again and again and again. So now he's basically got 3 phase shift ready to go here. And I mean, at this stage, he's just going to be able to play down both his shaffles that cause your opponent to lose an ember at the end of their turn. He's going to be able to play 3 fates to destroy a bunch of creatures. Yeah, and he's got 4 phase shift ready to go now. And there's another Twin Bolt mission. And this is what happens. Nepenthe Library Access is a crazy combo. Library Access letting you draw 1 card is great, but that can peter out. But then you use Nepenthe to reuse the Library Access, at which point you're drawing 2, and that is immediately. So now you're drawing 2 every time you play a card. But now you're drawing so many that you're probably going to be able to draw more. Okay, and here we go with the stealing. And he's managed now to be able to get George down to 5 ember remaining. And he's still got 6 phase shifts sitting out there ready to use. So, looks like a Shaffles is coming down here. It's going to make his opponent lose an ember at the end of his turn. Now, that's double Shaffles. So, Dan is going to lose 2 at the end of every one of George's turns. Now there's a Controller Weak coming down, which is going to force him to play a particular house. And look at the ember. And I know that Dan is playing Shadows, but he doesn't have too much to protect, and he doesn't have bait and switch. And George knows this. And I believe he's actually conceding. That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous. Dan was up 2 keys to nothing, and he was getting ready to win the game and roll, and then Library Access Nepenthe came down, and in the space of a very long turn, George just went, you know what, I'm going to get rid of all your ember. I'm going to use Twin Bolt Emission to completely clear your board. And I'm going to get a ridiculous pile of ember. Now, maybe if Dan has bait and switch in his deck, it doesn't really matter. Because he has up by 2 keys. So all he needed to do was use bait and switch. And even though George would have had like 1 billion ember, so would Dan. And Dan would have been able to forge his final one and win. Maybe if Dan had too much to protect. But he didn't. That's the point. And even though George had only forged a single key, Dan conceded. That's what's so weird about that last game. Even though he'd only forged a single key, he made his opponent concede. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is the adaptive format, which means now they swap. And I'm going to swap my notes here so we get them the right way round. Now George on the left is going to be playing Brobnar Shadows Untamed. And not Dad. As far as I am aware, Dan is not my dad. Weird things are going on if he is, because I'm like 33. And if Dan's older than me, it ain't by much. I don't think he is. I don't know how old Dan is, but I'm pretty sure he's not my dad. The point is, now Dan is going to be able to go with Disc Logos Untamed. And now he's got Nepenthe Library Access. And what's really weird is, not only did George just win the game, but George now gave Dan the blueprint, and now he's given him his deck. And he's gone, right, let's see if you can win from here. I mean, there's a good chance he will, to be honest. You've got to think that Dan just became the favourite in this game because George just gave him the blueprint. And you know that all Dan is going to be thinking here is, great, Nepenthe Library Access, we're ready to go. Because unfortunately, the MX Hongernail deck doesn't really have any ways that I can see, unless I'm missing something, to get rid of artifacts. And that's the issue. If there was some way to get rid of or use your opponent's artifacts, and there are plenty of cards in Call of the Archons that can do this, that would basically neutralize this combo. It's not that Library Access Nepenthe is an unassailable combo. There are ways to counter it. There are artifact hate cards which can get rid of the Nepenthe. There are cards like Too Much to Protect, and Effervescent Principle, and Bait and Switch, which can, or Burn the Stockpile even, which will get rid of your opponent's Ember advantage. The issue is that this MX Honganale Delgado deck doesn't have these tricks. And honestly, I don't see how we get around this. I don't see how the Library Access Nepenthe deck doesn't win. Unless they just never get the combo. Because the other thing is, maybe you've only ever got Library Access in hand with one other logos card, and then you play the one card and you draw 2 more, but there's no logos. You can, the combo can fail. Just doesn't look like it's going to very often. Also, am I the only one? Don't get me wrong, I love the adaptive format. I think the adaptive format is a wonderful, wonderful idea. But I cannot be the only one that finds it really weird to be handing over your deck to the other person. Let's just hope that the other person has washed their hands and doesn't riffle shuffle your deck. Fingers crossed, ladies and gentlemen. Fingers crossed. Now, there's a weird thing, and I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm going to imagine, because generally speaking, right, you flip over your deck list so that your opponent can't see it. But it's your deck. It doesn't matter if your opponent sees your deck list, it's your deck. They should know, and I mean, this is a final, right? By the time you get here, your opponent should really know what's in their own bloomin' deck. So we are rolling with game 2 here. It looks like Daniel is going to be going first, and he just straight away drops down an Ancient Bear. Cool. Not the best turn 1 card ever, but it could be worse. Dust Pixie comes down for George here. Grabs himself a couple of Ember and another Ancient Bear, which is quite nice. Now, there was a full moon, remember? Oh, this is great. Now he's using Nature's Call to pick up all his creatures. Remember, Full Moon lets you draw an extra Ember when you play a creature. And he's able to reuse the Dust Pixie and the Ancient Bear. And he's actually ending his first turn with 7 Ember. George is on it, ladies and gentlemen. And that's another one of the things you can do against Library Access Nepenthe. Just go, you know what? I know you're not playing any ridiculous Ember hate, so I'm just going to rush. I am going to try and make sure that I'm here before you get the combo going. Now, having said that, Dan does get the Nepenthe down straight away, along with that Ancient Bear and a Big Twig, and a Ritual of Balance, incidentally. And usually, you know, like I said, against some decks, putting the Nepenthe down too early would be awkward. There are ways to get rid of artifacts. But not in MX Honganale Delgado. Incidentally, as with all of the games from at least day 2 onwards, I have put the links to the decks in the description. So if you want to go and check out the deck list for the decks, they're linked in the description so you can go and check them out at your leisure. Now, we saw very little shadows in the previous game, but we see Shadow South coming down, we see Fagin coming down, we see Lights Out return 2 enemy creatures to their opponent's hand. Bearing in mind, I didn't actually say it out loud, but we knew it was coming. George has forced his first key, and he has got 4 Ember towards his second key ready to go. So now we see 3 Fates destroy the 3 most powerful creatures. That's everything but Dust Pixie. Is that it? No. No, he is getting a Guardian Demon down. Very nice. And, control the weak, so he gets to determine the active house for George next turn. And you gotta love how set up George is here. I mean, seriously, right? As a commentator for this game, I'm delighted. I now know that George is locked into shadows. When Control the Weak is played, I'm looking for any sign of what house is there. Now I know. So now Urchin comes down and steals an Ember. Oh, he is 1 Ember short. And you've got to worry whether that ends up costing George the game. Because here's the thing. I know it looks like George is jumping out to a giant lead. But remember that the guys have swapped decks into the adaptive format. Remember how this deck did exactly that in game 1. And it didn't matter. So down comes Big Twig. Down comes Ancient Bear. Down comes Mushroom Man. Oh, that's it. Would have been nice to play a full moon before that, but unfortunately his deck has no full moon. That's not strictly true. Dan's deck does have a full moon, but Dan is not playing Dan's deck right now. Dan is playing George's deck. Adaptive format does get just a little bit confusing at times. It's kind of fun, don't you think? Also, I legitimately do think adaptive format is amazing. I still worry what happens if your opponent is playing your deck and they accidentally bend one of the cards. Remember, it's a unique deck game. You can't get it back. So that's awkward. Then we do see a punch coming down, dealing 3 damage. And then we see a Brothers in Battle coming down. Choose a house for the remainder of the turn. Each friendly creature of that house may fight. And then we see a Fire Spitter coming down. And we see a Gang of Chieftain coming down, which is allowing Fire Spitter to ready and fight. Which is going to take down the Ancient Bear. Is it going to take down the Ancient Bear? I believe they're both, yes, they're both 5 power, but Fire Spitter does have an armor, which is how it will survive the fight with the Ancient Bear. Now we see some more damage being done here. And this is nice. And I should mention, George is checking here. He's got 7 Ember, which is easily enough to be forging next. Well, it's not easily enough, but it's enough to be forging next turn. Worth pointing out that Dan does have a Mamook in the deck he's currently playing, so even if a Mamook comes down, he's fine. Ooh! This is a little bit quicker. So now Library Access comes down, and he's got Nepenthe Seed on board. And you got to be feeling for George here. Because George is sitting there being like, no, dude, that's my move. That's my move. This is what I do. So straight away, he's got double library access. Library access is great. With Nepenthe Seed, it's dumb. I mean, I've got a deck with library access and free phase shift, and I think that's pretty good. But with Nepenthe Seed, it's just silly. And now it started again. He's going to be looking to get an insane amount of Ember on the board, knowing that George can't deal with it. He's going to be, there's a Fogify. He's going to be looking to lock George out of next turn, which between Fogify and Skippy Time Hog, he's essentially going to be able to do. He's going to be looking to take away George's Ember, so he's not forging next turn. There's Skippy Time Hog. And, I mean, basically, he's going to look to do exactly what George did last game. The question is George going to concede like Dan did, or is George going to try and ride it out? And this is the worst thing about the adaptive format. Hands down, unless your opponent goes a wild wormhole. I mean, unless your opponent accidentally breaks one of your cards or bends one of your cards, and you can never play that deck again, ever, because it's a unique deck game. You can't just replace a card. The worst thing is, you're sitting there going, no, I literally played this deck for the exact specific purpose of doing this to you. I don't want you to do it to me. Now, he is taking advantage of phase shift here. And he's getting himself a little bit of the old Fog Bank. Your opponent cannot use creatures to fight on their next turn. Which is kind of lovely, but it's the same thing as Fogify, so it really doesn't matter. Just gets an Ember. The thing is, look at his hand. He's got multiple Logos cards in his hand. And he's drawing 3 cards every single time. So he gets a Lab Work down there. Now, he does have to archive a card, but just archive some random card you don't want, like Save the Pack. Yeah, Save the Pack's not going to do him a huge amount of good here. And you just see, turn after turn, his hand is growing. Oh, look, here comes Dexter to capture an Ember. To be fair, George is still forging his second key next turn as it stands at the moment. But the problem is, George saw what happened in the last game. George saw the position he was able to put Dan in, so that Dan went, you know what, mate, even though I'm ahead in the game, I ain't doing it. I ain't doing it. I'm out. Now, it's not been quite the explosion, but again, he's still got a whole bunch of options. There goes Library of Babel, and he draws himself 2 cards. And it really is phase shift that just really tops this off. Because you see, even with Library Access Nepenthe, there comes a point where you've played all your logos cards. You need some element of house cheating here. And that's what phase shift gives you. Now, Wild Wormhole does as well, but as we saw with George, there comes a point where you've got your entire deck in your hand, so Wild Wormhole doesn't let you play a card from another house anymore. The first Wild Wormhole or two are really good, but after that, you kind of run out. But it's having that, and even if it's one copy, right? It's not 3, 4, 5 copies of phase shift. It is one copy of phase shift. But that in and of itself is enough. Because it keeps cycling, and that's the goal. When you're playing Library Access as a card is amazing. There's no argument there. Oh, looks like he's playing Hand of Dis, destroy a creature that is not on a flank. Even when, you know, even one phase shift, you need to be cycling. I lost my train of thought. There goes phase shift. So the whole point here is, yes, Library Access is good. But Library Access is really good when you can cycle your deck. When you can get all the way through your deck and come back again. Because as soon as you get to the stage where you can do that, then you're good. Because then you should, as soon as you've kind of done it once, you should be able to keep doing it. So then, even though you've only got one copy of phase shift, that one copy of phase shift keeps going and going and going and going. We saw Twin Bolt Emission. There is only one copy of Twin Bolt Emission in the deck, but we saw George play it over and over and over again to just continually make sure that his opponent had no creatures. And essentially, the position George is in at the moment is not an enviable one. George's position at the moment is, I really hope he runs out of steam. I really hope this combo fails. Because as it stands at the moment, okay, Dan's going to be reaping, or forging, but so am I. And that's okay. He's not in an unassailable position yet. Because even if we get into an Ember race here, George is going to go up by 2 keys to nothing. If there was a key charge in this deck, it would all be over. Or a Chota Hazari. They let you forge keys in the middle for essentially 7 Ember in the middle of your turn. That would essentially end the game. But there isn't. You've still got to wait the requisite amount of time to actually forge your keys. So if we turn it into an Ember race, George can still win. It's when Dan stops him forging, clears his board, and then turns it into an Ember race. That's when it becomes just, there's nothing you can do here. And you can see the sequencing here is very interesting. The order in which you play the cards to make sure you don't make any mistakes. Oh, there's another Library Access. Because we saw from George last game, in game 1, it was quite quick. He was kind of rocking through everything pretty quickly. Whereas Dan's taking a little bit more time, he's a little bit less sure. Here comes the Wild Wormhole, and at this stage, you just don't want to hit a Logos card. You just don't want to hit a Logos card. That is not what you want. There we go, Ancient Bear. Not the best. I mean, ideally, what you really want is an action card that's going to give you an Ember. That would be lovely. Maybe you'll control the weak. Or maybe 3 Fates. Although that would destroy a lot of his creatures as well here. And you can see that Dan's Ember pile here is just growing. And there's another phase shift. Now you can see from the counters he's actually got 2 phase shift ready to go here. And remember, like I said in the previous game, you don't have to use them right away. You can bide your time. At any point he can start playing cards from his other houses. And here's the thing that really gets me about this deck. It's Gasoline Maximillo. Gasoline being very appropriate given how fast and explosive this deck is. This is not your prime candidate here. You don't have multiple phase shifts. You don't have loads of stealing Shadows cards, because you could do that to completely run your opponent out of Ember very quickly. You don't have any I can forge in the middle of a turn cards like Key Charge or Chota Hazard, like I mentioned before. There are so many cards or types of cards that you would really, really want in a library access Nepenthe deck. And they're not in this deck. And it doesn't matter. Because essentially he's got a single phase shift, and I still contend, right, if you've got Nepenthe library access but there's no phase shift or other house cheating you can use, at that stage I think it could be an issue. But outside of that, it doesn't really matter what you've got. As long as you can get some Ember and get rid of a bit of Ember and clear your opponent's board, there are so many different combinations that can work really nicely here. I mean, goodness, I don't know how many Ember Dan's got there. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16 Ember, something around there. I mean, by the end of it, by the time he finishes, he's going to have enough Ember to forge all 3 of his keys on consecutive turns. But he's still left his opponent with 6 Ember. Now, has he got his Murmook down yet? No, he hasn't got a Murmook down. When Murmook goes down, that's going to stop George forging next turn. But that's still potentially going to leave George in the running, because then George doesn't forge, Dan forges, George forges, Dan forges, and then George could forge to win the game. That could work. So a little bit of a discussion here about Wild Wormhole. I believe it might... No. Might be he can't play the top card of his deck? Should still be able to play it for the Ember bonus, though. Either way, this is just... And this is a weird thing, right? This is the thing that I keep coming back to. It's still not the perfect library access Nepenthe deck. There are people out there who are in a way, way better position. A way better position in terms of this kind of deck. That's what's so weird here. There are better options. There are better decks. That's what's so ridiculous. Hey-ho. Right. So, I mean, he's got everything down at this point. Just everything. Just, this is the thing, right? And I encourage you all, right? If you want to try commentating, just try commentating. Use this footage. It's not my footage, incidentally. Lovely folks at Cascade Games have provided it. You can see their logo on the bottom corner. I won't be offended. Get rid of my commentary. Put your own on. I'm cool with that. Point is, have a go. Because I'll tell you something for nothing, ladies and gentlemen. It gets really awkward. When you've got something like this, and there's not a huge amount to say at this stage. Library access Nepenthe has been played. He's drawing multiple cards every time he plays a card. He's getting all of his creatures out. And what's even worse, there's no general board wiping played by George here. Now, to be fair, he does have 2 copies of Nature's Call. But do you really think... I mean, we know that Control the Weak is in Dan's board here. So you know he's not going to give him Untamed. You got to think he's not giving him Untamed. Because remember, it's Dan's deck, so Dan knows all of the tricks. And this is just keeping up. Well, what he actually did there, he played Twin Bolt Emission to destroy both of his own Dust Imps. Dust Imp, you gain 2 Ember when it's destroyed. So he played 2 Dust Imp down, then played a Twin Bolt Emission to destroy both his Dust Imps and gain himself 4 Ember. Look how much Ember he's got. This is crazy. I definitely need to try, and I always use a screenshot of the video on the thumbnail. I need to get a screenshot of this. It's another library access. And here's the thing, right? This might sound cruel. I have no sympathy for George here. Dan didn't do this to George. George did this to George. George brought this deck. I'm assuming George knew it was an adaptive finals. George should be happy he made it all the way to the finals. But let's be clear. George did this. George brought this deck. I'm just going to go ahead and assume Mermook's on the board. There's a bit of glare. Oh, he's got another library access in his hand. Oh, there's Twin Bolt Emission. Has he gotten rid of both of them yet? There's some quite powerful creatures on board. No, they ain't gone yet, ladies and gentlemen. But it's all right. There's 2 Twin Bolt Emission. He's going to keep getting them. I mean, at this stage, the library access are pointless. He's drawing every card every turn. Every turn he plays a card, there is one card in his deck, he draws it. Then that card becomes his deck, the one he just played, and then he plays another card and draws it. So, yeah. I mean, it's almost worth just getting a counter for Infinity Ember. And then you've got Infinity Ember left. So George is just having a quick look at his thing now and going, right, what can I do? Because he shouldn't be able to... There must be a Mermook down. Yeah, there we go. So George isn't forging, and he just knows there's nothing he can do. There's nothing he can do to stop Dan. Now, here is the interesting bit. Who gets that deck for game 3? Because they've both played it. And they've both seen that when the turn starts, the game ends. In both games we've had so far, the library access Nepenthe seed turn starts. And that's it. That's the end of the game. The game has ended. The other player hasn't done a single thing before conceding. So you've got to think that both players are going to fight tooth and nail for that deck. Now, the way adaptive format works, we've now seen the same... If the same player wins both games, you're good. If the same deck wins both games, now we end up in an awkward situation of who actually gets that deck. And the way we do it is by bidding chains. So chains, you collect them on a card, and essentially, chains stop you drawing cards. I think it's up to 6 or 7 chains, you draw 1 fewer, and then after that it's 2 fewer, then 3 fewer. And every time you would draw, you draw fewer cards and shed a chain. Now, I would be happy to take 4 or 5 chains here. Just take 1 fewer card for 4 or 5 turns, knowing that you can have that dumb turn. Here's the thing, though. What happens if you take enough chains that you don't get the combo? Because remember, the way this deck loses is you don't get the combo. So, how many chains is too many? Who wants it? Who really wants that deck? Now, you know that George is going to want that deck. You know George is going to want that deck. The question is, how confident does Dan feel in his deck? Because if Dan thinks he can win with his deck, then we can roll with it. But if Dan just played that game and went, no. I've seen what happens. I must have that deck. Then we're going to get into a bit of a bidding war. So I think they're just checking quickly that both players have got the correct amount of cards. That's another, obviously, big potential problem with the adaptive format. You could end up, not deliberately, but inadvertently stealing your opponent's cards. They get mixed in with decks. But have they just both gone back to their original deck? I mean, we can clearly see that they've gone back to their original decks. We know that the Shadows deck is on the right with George. Is this the bidding process? Who wants which deck? Because if they both want their original decks, we're cool. So here comes the chain tracker. Yes, it is 6 until you go up. So up to 6 chains, you draw 1 fewer card at the end of your turn and shed a chain. 7 to 12, you draw 2 fewer cards and shed a chain, and so on and so forth. This is a huge decision, which can absolutely decide the game. Who wants it more? That is the question. Because, and look, this is not always going to be the case. But there is a clear, as far as I'm concerned, and look, I've just watched these two games very closely, as hopefully you have. As far as I'm concerned, there's a really good... Okay. As far as I'm concerned, there is a best deck. And I'm now just assuming, and I actually don't know, which is cool. I'm just assuming George is going to win the Vault Tour here. I'm assuming George wins the Vault Tour. I don't think George's deck is unbeatable by any stretch of the imagination. I think there are some library access Nepenthe decks out there that have got stuff like Key Charge, which might be, when the combo goes off, unbeatable. But there are so many hard counters to his deck. Something like Too Much to Protect or Burn the Stockpile can just get rid of that ridiculous stockpile of Ember and then you're good. Just anything that can get rid of artifacts. And there's a bunch of cards out there. I mean, there are cards that escape me for the moment, but you can just use your opponent's artifact as your own and then destroy it. I think Nexus allows you to use an artifact. And remember, even if you don't destroy the artifact when using it, when you use Nepenthe Seed, you destroy it. So if you can use it, you can get rid of it. So something like a simple Nexus. Yeah, when you reap with Nexus, use an opponent's artifact as if it were yours, and it's got elusive, so your opponent has to attack it twice to get rid of it. I think there's a million different counters for George's deck here. I just don't think Dan's playing any of them. Now, I'm looking at the chain tracker here, and I don't think there are any chains on it. And I'm sure I saw a comment somewhere where somebody said that the person who got the deck bid 0 chains. And look, I'm not at this Vault Tour. I ain't in the final. But I don't know why Dan would do that. Because it seems like Gasoline Maximiliano, Dungeon Keeper, is the better deck here. But evidently not. All right. So it looks like we are going to be rolling. I don't think there are any chains there. And we're just off now. We're just rolling. This is bizarre, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly bizarre. Cool. Let's do this. Let's do this. Now, it looks like Dan might actually be taking a mulligan. We see this extremely rarely, but you do have an option to take your opening hand, decide it isn't quite good enough, draw one fewer card, but get a do-over. Now, remember, at the end of your turn, you draw till you got 6 cards in hand. So, it will hurt you the first turn, but after that, and if you're going first, it doesn't really hurt you that much either way. But this is kind of interesting, don't you think? This is kind of interesting. We finally got a mulligan. I don't know how Dan wins this. What he needs is an emergency stop you forging card, which I don't think he has, or an artifact disruption card, which I don't think he has, because library access without the Nepenthe Seed is not as good. Now, if you've got library access and 3 or 4 phase shift, it can be, but otherwise. So anyway, Dan starts off with Silvertooth, comes in active, reaps, and then Control the Weak was used from George to force Dan into using Shadows again. And it looks like he had no Shadows cards in hand, so he just reaped. Now, Nepenthe Seed comes down along with Big Twig, and George is once again going, look, I got this. There are some matchups where I could not put it down this early. And then you're in the awkward situation of, oh, do I keep it in hand ready for later and draw 1 fewer card every turn because I've kept it in hand? Or do I just go for it? But that's not the case here. Because you know your opponent can't get rid of it, so you can just chill. Now, a punch does come down, gets to do 3 damage either to Big Twig or to... is that Guardian Demon? No, that's not Guardian Demon. That's Shula. When you play, if your opponent has 4 or more Embers, steal 1. Fire Spitter comes down. Does he have a Gang of Chieftain to immediately attack with it? Who knows? No. Now he does get... what's that? Oh, that's Unguarded Camp. Doesn't do much. For each creature you have in play in excess of your opponent, a friendly creature captures 1 ember, but each one cannot capture more than 1 in this way. Has he actually done it already? This is ridiculous! This is turn 2! Now here's the question. Oh, okay, yeah. Hitting the phase shift as well. I think this might be it. Because again, if you do it too early and your deck's got too many cards in, you can peter out. But as it stands at the moment, Quixo the Adventurer comes down. Now we get 3 Fates. Oh no, Fogify. Sorry, my apologies. Fogify has come down. And... oh, he can't play 3 Fates. Yes, he can. That is his deck. I'm getting confused. He does play 3 Fates. So Twin Bottle Mission takes out that. And here's the thing. Doing it this early can actually be huge. Because his opponent isn't forging next turn. So whereas in previous games we were going, oh, you've got to get enough Ember to get there, and you've got to stop your opponent forging next turn, and control the weak to give them the right house. And here, honestly, he can just build up like 25, 30 Ember and be like, boom, guaranteed win. Because again, his opponent isn't playing any of those cards. So a Dexter comes down and captures an Ember, and that's quite nice. And a Wild Wormhole comes down, and... ooh, what's he playing? Fog Bank? Doesn't really matter. And then he's drawing more cards. And when you're facing a deck that doesn't have... and to be honest, even bait and switch here, you could just keep going until you got like 40 or 50 Ember and be like, okay, you're going to have enough Ember, but so am I, and I'm going to win first. Wouldn't always win. Wouldn't win if you were behind, but when you're even on keys, yeah, it would work. So, I don't... we're on turn 2, right? We're on George's second turn. And I don't see any way he loses from here. He's got enough Ember bonuses on his cards that he's just going to be able to constantly get cards. He's just going to be able to constantly get cards, constantly get Ember, and build up just a huge, huge stash of Ember. And although there are plenty of cards in the game that would stop that, forgive the bad English, there ain't none of them in Dan's deck. And I know I've said that a few times, and I'm sorry, but it is the single biggest factor in this matchup. The library access to Nepenthe Seed, yes, it's big. And if there was a key charge in there, it wouldn't matter what your opponent has, but there isn't. It's the complete and utter lack of counter cards. Because there's another game here. There's another final. Whereby George sits there and starts doing his thing, and then his opponent's just like, boom, now you got nothing. That's not this final, ladies and gentlemen. You know, Doorstep to Heaven, right? It's a Sanctum card. Each player with 6 or more Ember is reduced to 5. That would be a hard counter to what he's doing here, because your opponent would pass the turn without forging a key, you drop them down to 5 Ember. And they can't even forge next turn. And that would do it. Now, Burn the Stockpile only loses them 4 Ember. It can be played around. Bait and Switch and Effervescent Principle kind of lose them half their Ember, depending. So that can kind of be played around. But we've also got too much to protect here. Too much to protect. If your opponent, you steal all but 6 of your opponent's Ember. So that, again, would stop them doing it. But I'm desperately trying here. I'm looking, and I'm having a look, and I'm going, right. What can Dan do? And you see Dan. Hood up, hands behind his head. He's just waiting for it to end. And he's hoping it ends. And bearing in mind, right, that the turn 2 thing's big here. Because there was a chance George played 1 or 2 Logos cards, didn't draw the rest, ran out of steam, and it's over. But he's basically cycled his entire deck at this point. And now he's just keeping going. And there comes another library access. Now he's drawing 3 cards every time he plays a card. 6 if it's Wild Wormhole or Phase Shift, essentially. Oh, speaking of phase shift, and again, he's sitting there and he's backing them up so he can do whatever he wants. And if he builds himself up to kind of 20 Ember, he should be okay here. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things that Dan can do. He's got 2 Urchin, each of which can steal an Ember. He's got Magda the Rat that can steal 2 Ember. And he's got 2 copies of Nature's Call, which can pick up creatures, which can then be played down again. Now, Magda the Rat wouldn't work, because Magda the Rat basically gets undone when it leaves play. But Urchin could be reused here. And he's got Fagin, which can reuse the Urchin. So it's not that he's got no stealing cards. It's the way Dan's deck is set up is to steal the old Ember here or there. Steal 1 or 2 Ember to stop your opponent being able to do much. It is not set up to stop this. And that's the problem. And honestly, I think, and this sounds horrible, but I think the biggest question left in this game at this stage, when does Dan give up? At what point has Dan had enough? Because, essentially, let's say between Urchin, Fagin, Magda the Rat, etc. Let's say between all of them he can still say 10 Ember. Then George gets to 28 Ember and goes, boom, guaranteed win. But even then, Magda the Rat comes down. Well, George is going to end this turn with 2 Twin Bolt Emission in hand. So Magda the Rat is going to go down straight away. So are the Urchin. So it's Fagin. But essentially whatever you want is going to go down straight away. And then he's going to essentially have whatever creatures he wants on the field. So even if he doesn't have quite enough Ember, he can just reap. And then when he starts reaping, he's going to get enough Ember to win the game the following turn. Now, he's sitting there with 9 at the moment. So he's not there. He's not 1. Do you think when George opened this deck, he went and bought a couple of other starter sets to get a bunch more Ember? Oh, he's actually ending his turn. I think he's ending his turn. That's interesting. Did he run out of steam? I think he ran out of steam. I mean, look, he's certainly got enough Ember to forge next turn, but that was not quite what we saw in games 1 and 2. Did he just run out of stuff to do? I don't think he ran out. No, he can't. No, he didn't run out of stuff to do. Look at his hand. Ah, he's even archived Library Access Nepenthe Seed, or at least Nepenthe Seed, if not Library. No, I think just Nepenthe Seed. Because here's the thing, right? He's going to have to wait. There goes Library Access, and that's the worst thing. It's not just that you're rushing for Ember. I've made a big point about the fact that this deck can rush for Ember. What I've not made a big point about, and I think this does bear talking about, you can just completely control your opponent. You can make sure that Fogify stops them fighting next turn. And you can make sure Control of the Weak tells them what house they've got to be. There's actually quite a bit of control in this deck. Essentially, it just keeps going and going. And it's not just that he did it last turn, it's that he can do it every single turn. Because here's the thing, he doesn't need Nepenthe Seed anymore. There goes Skippy Time Hog. Because he's got such a tiny deck at this stage that he can always play Library Access, play a couple of Logos cards, draw it. Any non-Logos card he wants to play, he can use Phase Shift, And then he's rolling. And we get to the stage, and I'm going to have a video about this later on in the week. Is this bad? Is this actually bad for the game? I don't know, is the honest answer. I don't think George's deck specifically is bad for the game. I think George's deck has a lot of easy counters. But then again, Nepenthe as a whole does. So, here he goes again. And here's the worst thing. Dan's not doing anything. And I've got to ask the question at this stage. Do we think Dan wishes he bid some more keys? Bid some more chains? Maybe he does. Because now Control the Weak is coming down every time. And you see there he keeps choosing Brob Knight. I want to choose Shadows. Because even though Dan can't steal many Ember with Shadows, George still wants to make sure he doesn't steal any. So he's got a Keyforged. Doesn't have enough at the moment to forge next turn, though. Poor Dan. So there does appear to be a conversation going on here. I must confess, I don't have access to the judges. I don't know what they're talking about. But certainly, we're getting to a stage here where I don't see how Dan wins. Now, honestly, I don't see how Dan's deck beats this deck. I think the way you beat this deck is chains. I think you just sit there and you rock and you go, you know what? I'm going to stop you. I am going to make sure that you don't have anything here. I'm going to make sure that I get rid of all of your creatures. But even I don't think he's got the cards for that. I don't think he's got the cards to stop his opponent rolling. I think when the combo goes off, I think it's near as darn it game over. And that's kind of depressing, is it not? All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we have gone for a little while. What we've done, I've skipped a big bunch of stuff. There's been a ruling going on. Now, as I'm sure many of you noticed while watching the game, unfortunately, George forgot to flip a key. So the ruling is going down here as to exactly what is going to happen. Does that mean that George is disqualified for failing to maintain the game state? Is he allowed to now flip and get his second key? What's actually going to be going on here? And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is the question. It's a very interesting question. Because this is going to decide the final, right? This is it. This is it. This is the final of the Vault Tour. Either George gets... Oh, and they've let him flip a key. They've let him flip the key while I looked away for a second. And it looks like the game's just going to carry on. That's very interesting. Now, one of the games we didn't stream, apparently, had a very similar situation where George's opponent didn't flip a key and was not allowed to actually flip it, though I didn't commentate that round, so I can't speak. But looking through the chat, that's what some people were saying. So George here is just going to sit there and reap to get a whole bunch of stuff, and his board setup here is so good. He's got a complete lock on Dan here, and looks like Dan is just going to pass his turn. George is going to forge his third key. And Dan is going to be left to wonder, what if? What if I would have bid some more chains, etc.? Congratulations, though. Getting to the final of a Vault Tour is a great accomplishment. Really good play on Dan's part. Must have played very well throughout the weekend. Great player. Good deck, just unfortunately wasn't good enough in the end. And congratulations to George for firstly winning the Vault Tour, and secondly starting a conversation with us about what's going on with these decks. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is a discussion for another day. Thank you for sticking with me for the final. Do make sure you tell me what you think about it down below. And if you want to start the discussion about these decks in the comment section, hey, go right ahead. But then make sure you like this. Oh, go nuts, be nice, you know the deal. But then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk about games like Keyforge. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Play.